Welcome to the Inflection Podcast, where we explore the pivotal moments that have shaped us into who we are today. I am your host, Anabi, and I can't wait to dive into these moments with you. Let's get it.
Welcome to another episode of the Inflection Podcast. It's fantastic to have with me here today the CEO of the altMBA, Alex Peck. Thank you so much, Alex.
It is a pleasure to be here with you on the Inflection Podcast, and I'm thrilled to be getting a chance to talk a little bit about altMBA, because I know you're an alum, as well as the moments in my life that have changed my thinking or my trajectory. So let's go.
Yeah, let's do it. It was very interesting when we were chatting about altMBA, and I'm fairly obsessed with the concept of pivotal moments and inflection points. So you've had quite an illustrious career, creative director, and a variety of other roles leading to CEO. So I bet there's a rich amount of pivotal moments and inflection points there. So what has that looked like for you leading up to leading the altMBA group?
Yeah. I have moved around a lot in my life and tried a lot of different things. And I'm very grateful for that, because I think some of the best advice I got from my parents was that you change a lot in those first 10 years after you leave home, and that sampling is useful. And I had a conversation with a friend just a couple years after university. And I said, I'm headed this direction right now, but I used to be headed that direction, and it's really freaking me out. And they reminded me that when a sailboat goes across the lake or any body of water, it tacks. It changes directions back and forth.
Interesting.
And it never actually usually points to the end destination, because you got to catch the wind, you get a wave, the conditions move you in a certain way. And that, strangely, actually brought me a lot of peace with the idea that what I had didn't make sense as far as like a career, right? But as I have been on this sort of tacking journey, moving one direction and the other, I've started to see the direction that my boat has been heading. And I've started to learn things like how being the best at the world in anything is really hard, but being really good at two or three things that overlap in an interesting way starts to give you a sweet spot that not a lot of other people can compete with. And I think one of my sweet spots has been how eager I am to learn, because I keep managing to talk people into giving me projects or jobs or gigs. They're just a little bit outside my comfort zone, right? And then I scramble to learn, to try. And I keep a lot of that inside of me, but that allows me to keep trying new stuff. And it's one of the reasons I've been able and willing. So first there's the mindset about tacking, and then there's the habit of trying to stretch a little bit and learn as I go. That's one of the things that's really helped me change these roles, right? Because I started as Seth creative director. I became the technology and systems guy. And now I'm the people leader, right? And those are three different things.
Yeah.
There's a through line to it that makes sense to me, but I certainly understand from the outside. And I think the best way to explain it is anybody who's started a business, who's run a project, who's managed a club, you start realizing you wear a lot of different hats. And for me, one of the things I'm realizing is that I actually like wearing all the hats more than I really like wearing any one of the hats. And that's an interesting insight.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's an asset, right? When you're able to wear multiple hats and shift into different roles, it leaves you changed, where I feel like even if you specify and focus on the role, all of those experiences come with you, right? It's never throw away. I'm sure a lot of what you've done, creative director, CTO, and other roles, like all come to bear now with your new role as CEO. That does raise another thought. With your role as CEO, the altMBA, and helping steer and guide it. I really love the analogy you use of the tack and the ship changing course and never really pointing in the direction it's going to arrive at always, right? You got to evolve with that. What does that look like for the altMBA, right? Education as we know it has evolved so much. COVID happened, the pandemic, and how has that evolved, right? Things for the direction of altMBA.
Yeah. Before the pandemic, one of the things we spent time explaining to people is there's this thing called Zoom. It's like Skype, right?
Yeah.
That conversation doesn't happen anymore. And the idea that you could collaborate from different locations is something companies are still fighting about, right? In remote work policies. So
Yeah.
can you collaborate in a learning journey with people in different places? Do you need to be in the same room? Do you need a building like a university? We're seeing a lot of that stuff unbundle because of the internet, right? There's some fundamental things about how a flattened sort of communication network in the world changes the cultural dynamics. So I think we're seeing people start to move into a comfort zone around the idea of remote learning and remote collaboration. But
Yeah.
I think the bigger change that altMBA is working on, Maven is working on, Creative Live is working on, like all of, I should do more name dropping and Seed. Like there's
Yeah.
so many places that are helping bring people together in non-traditional learning ways. And my wife has an MBA from Quantic, which she did remotely.
Ooh,
There's
I love
all
Quantic
these
too.
ways that you can learn online and people are down with that. But developing the habit of being a lifelong learner, of changing the mindset from graduation to it's a journey. I think that's what the next 10 years of altMBA is about. We know we have a way of getting people to go on a 1-month journey with us, to start to explore their leadership, to start to see soft skills and people skills and their own self-management and curiosity and worldview as something that they can change, right? In 31 days, but it's only the beginning. And
Yeah.
everything about industrial education is about the test, the next step, and then you graduate, right? But all of that just implies that you're done. You've learned it. You're good. And
Check the
certainly
box.
check the box. And look, there's a lot of truth in the idea that you graduate and you should go out into the world and you should take your knowledge and you should put it into action. Doing and knowing are two different things. They're different skills. They take different practice. But so graduation gets that right. Go out into the world and start doing. Learn from that. Get some experience. But what it misses out on is that continuing to have structured learning and support while you're doing is absolutely vital. So I think getting people to change their mindset around education is really what the future of education is about. Certainly there will be consolidation in the market. We will see innovations with technology. I think artificial reality, not virtual reality, but like augmented reality, where I could be sitting in my chair and I could put some glasses on and I could see you and I could see more than just shoulders up. And because so much of body language helps communication and it could feel like we're in the same room, I'm sure we can point at something. I'm sure there are ways that technology is going to make it easier. You work in
absolutely.
blockchain, right? You can think about ways that we can order and structure the information and share it. But if people don't culturally want to keep learning, I think that's the big thing. And it's one of the reasons why I wanted to name drop these other schools and I wanted to brag about them because I think we're all working on the same sort of thing here, right?
Yeah. In the future of education is here, right? And organizations like yours and some of the ones you mentioned are bringing that to fruition. Speaking of name dropping, I love to name drop the Immersed guys. They have this cool VR headsets, and they've been growing. I just invested in them, so I really believe in the mission for what they're building. And I thought of that when you mentioned the put on classes for augmented reality and things like that. I'm seeing a lot more players in the space. And as compute gets a lot cheaper and we have better processing, I'm sure we're going to see smaller and smaller form factors. And what does it look like? Just put on a pair of glasses like what you have on, right? And it's got augmented
You know,
reality.
I think I was reading something and I forget exactly where, but it was about somebody. Oh no, this is what it was. Face recognition software is much further along than most people realize. And I was reading this article about how big tech had been buying up facial recognition companies, and they developed stuff where they could just, using a camera, point at anybody's face, look them up and know who they are. And they sat on this technology for over 5 or 6 years because they did not feel like it was in the public good to release it. And look,
Oh my.
I'm surprised as anyone that big tech decided to roll back something that could be profitable for the sake of the civil discourse or the civil society, and giving culture time to adapt to how fast the technology is changing, right? Because we can't stop tech from changing, but we
Yeah.
might slow down the adoption cycles so that people and culture can catch up, laws, everything else that needs to fit with this. But the
Yeah.
idea that I could have a chip in my glasses, put them on, and being the
That's
person I
great.
am who's good with faces, but not great with names, boy, it would be delightful if I had a little pop up that was like, you've met this person. Here's when you've met them. This is their name. Right? Because I don't want to be
That'd be
rude.
cool.
I just forgot someone's name this morning while I was out on a walk, and we made a joke of it, but it doesn't feel good to have that happen.
Yeah.
So I can see lots of ways that sort of thing would be a delight, right? I'd much rather go on a virtual walk with you than be sitting in a chair when we talk. And certainly we're recording, so we want a nice sound, we want a nice background. But if I could have a chip in and see a virtual you walking with me out in the woods while we're talking,
Do it.
that kind of stuff just makes it, that makes the connection feel more human, right? We're adding layers of fidelity. Audio, you can hear. Text, you've got to interpret the tone. Video, you can see more and more of this. So as we keep adding layers, and I think some of this augmented stuff will give us more body language, it will give us more other sort of contextual clues, right? That it's closer and closer to being in person without having to fly across the country or spend the
Totally.
time or the money or anything else. So I'm excited about that part. But
Yeah. Same here. Outside of, I was talking with friends of mine recently about hobbies, right? And how important those are to fill your tank outside of just, it's so easy to settle into the routine of work. And for some, work is awesome, work is fun, but it's work. So for you, outside of the fun you have apparently from leading altMBA and having conversations like this, what fills your tank? How do you recharge?
mm, this is an excellent question. As the parent of two young children who are under 10, I have a real need to fill that tank up and a limited amount of time to do
Yeah.
it. And there is something. So there's a writer named Courtney Martin who wrote a lovely piece for On Being about bringing home her first child. There's this quote that sticks with me because it said, you come home and you get that little striped hat that goes over their head. And you also get a really intense bullshit detector, because suddenly your priorities have shifted so much that you start having a really easy way to say no to stuff that's not a great fit. And that for me happened as well in terms of hobbies and things I was spending my time or energy on that were interesting, but might not really recharge me. Right. So it became very clear to me what things do that. And for me, I try to take a hike every day, go out to the woods, being in nature, moving my body. Those are really good for me. One of the other things I do is I volunteer 2 days a week at the local library working with teens. And it was not something that I thought would be as recharging because it takes so much work. And it turns out that it is one of the highlights of my week,
Wow.
because
That is amazing.
I get a view of what my kids might be like when they're older. I get a different perspective of the little town I live in, and I get to be in a space where I help create an environment for these kids, because I think this is so important with people growing up, where you've got to have other adults you trust who you feel safe communicating with, right? Because there
Yeah.
might be things you need to talk about you can't talk about with your parents, aren't for your peers. So
Totally.
turns out feeling really connected to my local community is one of those things that does it for me.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And that's very interesting. Like volunteering with teens and feeling recharged by that. It's like, how does that work?
Yeah.
But
One of
like,
my first jobs after college was running a very small nonprofit in Chicago. And we did safer sex education for teens in high schools and junior highs. And there's something for me that's just super rewarding about feeling like I am helping people at a time in my life that I found very difficult, right? So I think there's a sort of paying it forward aspect that maybe if teenage years had been easier for me, maybe I'd be like, oh man, it's a lot of work. But I almost
yeah,
always feel like, oh boy, I would have loved to have had this. And so I think for me, I get that satisfaction from getting to volunteer.
awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. I know you're a huge proponent of growth, personal growth, learning. Any tools or ideas there from your own anecdotal experience to help folks foster a lifelong practice of learning and personal growth? Someone who's trying to get into that and grow, what would you say? Apart from, hey, do the altMBA.
I'm going to take a moment and think about that. And I'm
Yeah.
going to take your hook there to the altMBA because I do get a lot of satisfaction from helping run a business that creates an impact I'm proud of in people. But one of the questions that we always have at altMBA is like, how did you know it was the time to make this leap?
Yeah. Uh, I could go for that.
Yes, please.
So for me, I did altMBA 2019. And that was a time where I was grappling with a lot of things, growth being one of them. I was tired and maybe to a certain degree discontent with where I was. Like, it's got to be more. Traditional schooling thing, great, awesome. Plus, I want to learn and really be in a space with other individuals that have the same mindset with the penchant to learn and grow and just make stuff happen. altMBA, we talk about make a ruckus, right? So I just had this desire to make a ruckus, learn and make something happen. And it so happened around then, I was aware of Seth Godin, being aware of altMBA, and it just felt right. I talked to my company, to my VP at the time, and he approved it. So that was helpful as well. Oh, all right. He was familiar with Seth's work, and it was a no-brainer to go that route. So for me, it was more like an internal desire I want to do something different and learn and grow with a group of individuals thinking the same thing. And altMBA did that for me and much more.
I love hearing that. And I'm glad to hear that your VP supported you because we understand
Yeah.
it's an investment for people. And we've had a lot of people who get support from their company. But I always think it's interesting because people come in to an experience, a learning journey. And one of the core parts of that is that you have to, at some point, admit to yourself that you want more or you want different, right? There has to be just enough discontent that you're willing to go through the discomfort of change, right?
Yeah.
To get to the other side. And I think when I think about tools for learning and growth foundationally, and this is why I talked about the graduation mindset versus the lifelong learning mindset, is you've got to have a reason why it's worth it. And if you don't have a reason why it's worth it, it's very hard to take any of these tactics or tools or tips and you start to apply them. So if you're out there and you're listening and you do want to change, but you're having trouble sticking to it or figuring out what's going on, first of all, everybody learns differently and you might not have found the fit for you, right? So you got to personalize it and you got to try enough things that you get a sense of what works. But even more than that, when you hit the resistance, when you're in the dip, you got to know why it matters. If you don't have a personal reason, then it's going to be tough, right? Because graduation mindset says you get a reward. There's external validation. You get a job, you get a certificate, you get who knows what. But the kind of stuff that altMBA is trying to flip a switch in people, is saying, you are going to be responsible for your journey. You are going to be the one who's out there figuring out what's next for you, trying to decide which resources to use, what people to ask for advice, like where to go to get your support and accountability. And
Yeah.
that comes from inside you. And I was not taught, and I think a lot of people in westernized cultures are not taught or brought up in a place that embraces this sort of intrinsic internal motivation. A lot of the motivation is really external, right? And I'm not against external motivation, but for the kind of stuff we're trying to do to change your mindset from graduation to lifelong learning, it really helps to have a reason why doing this work is important, because growth, you know it,
Yeah.
it is not easy, right?
It's hard. It's hard. And it's not a default setting. Things tend to atrophy, right? And fall. And similar with growth. It's like you got to keep pushing. I listened to a speaker a while ago say it from this perspective, and it really stuck with me. And he was talking about running a company and sales and growing and learning in that direction. But he talked about why, and along the same lines, developing a strong internal motor. It was something he called it, right? That motor has to keep going. You need a V8 in there, if we talk about engines, just to keep pushing. And that really stuck with me, because many times you got to go uphill, right? We're looking at, again, growth with analogies, uphill, you climb the mountain, you swim it. So you will give out if you don't have a strong motor that keeps chugging along. Yes, sometimes there are lulls, there are valleys, but that analogy of the penchant or the desire to grow being similar to a motor is very useful for me, and it stuck with me all these years.
I love that. And I'll take that and say the motor is a habit and behaviors that you adopt, a mindset even. And the reasons why are the fuel, right? Because you got to feed that motor.
I love it.
And right. And there's this great Zig Ziglar quote about loving inspiration. Great. Like a shower. Should have a little bit every day, right? It doesn't stick. A lot of these things, you're so right. The atrophy. I think of learning more as a gym than anything else.
Yeah, I like that. I'm doing CrossFit right now. So that's the, oh my
There was
gosh.
a quote from this concert pianist that said, if I don't practice for one day, I'll notice. And if I don't practice for 2 days, my conductor will notice. And if I don't practice for 3 days, the audience will notice. And
Wow.
who knows if it's quite that tight, but
Yeah.
there are plenty of stories of high performing individuals who make it almost a ritualized habit to do the thing that's important to them every day. Writers that write, musicians that play their scales, comedians who write their jokes, athletes who train. Why in the world would leaders just wing it?
Man, mic drop. And that's a perfect way for us to bring this episode to a close, Alex. It's been freaking fantastic to have you on. I'm a big fan of what you're doing at the altMBA, and I'm excited for all these years to come with all the change we're seeing and the evolution of learning as we know it.
Thank you, Navy. I really appreciate that. Could I, I'm putting you on the spot here because we're recording, but if people are out there listening, and they know you, they've been listening to you, and they trust you, and they have questions about your experience in the altMBA, would you be open to chatting?
120%. Definitely. I can't recommend it enough, and I'll gladly share my experiences. Also makes me think too, probably should make some video or resource about my experiences in the altMBA. I think I wrote something some years ago. I got to go dig it up. But yeah, heck yeah.
Thank you. It's one of the requests we get most often incoming is, hey, is there an alum I can talk to? And in this case, the ones listening, they know you. So there's nothing better than talking to somebody else who you get along with. Because what you were saying before was that same mindset, right? Wanting that community. And that's what so many of us are trying to build here, is a way to connect online. But yes,
Yeah.
thank you. It's been such a great pleasure. And I appreciate you showing up. For anyone out there who's curious, and for all you learners out there, just, it's worth it. Just stay with your journey, figure it out for yourself, because there's nothing better than learning and healing and helping others.
Percent. Thank you so much, Alex.